Maybe down, I found that something there. No, just thought I'll be in the middle of nowhere, or just walking around and suddenly that'll come in, and then I'll finally come in. It's just wonderful. Thought a lot work there before you didn't have to stay alive. Or ain't gonna dance no more, no big fat one. It's really hard to get rid of once you get it. And I apologize. In 1754, the writer Horace Walpole wrote a short novel called The Three Princes of Serendip. And it was about these three guys who go around having adventures on this little island. And he tells us that the heroes are always making discoveries. And they're always by accident finding things they were not in quest of. And of course, it's from this serendip, the island of serendipity, we have the word serendipity. Finding something you're not expecting of. Boy, that just touches our lives all the time. I have an apartment full of stuff I was not in quest of. They're all books. They're all books. And many other things. And then there's some piles of stuff that I was in quest of. And that's to be what happens, isn't it? We get surrounded by the stuff we're in quest of and the stuff we were not in quest of. It happens in our lives all the time. Our reading was the first thing I saw when I opened the hymn. The very first thing I saw was that one. Take courage. Oh yeah, that's serendipitous, isn't it? And our lives are often jolted by those kind of moments. And for one of those, for me, that I want to share, happened when I was probably the 10th grade. I was prone to not pay attention in class and look through the book that we were supposed to be reading, usually a collection of poems or stories, you know, the big giant things, the big doorstops we would be given at the beginning of the semester. Open it up and read through stuff. And I was always doing it on my own. I didn't seem to be paying attention to what the teacher was doing or what the other class might have been reading. I was flipping through, finding my own thing. And so many times I look back to those years and I can trace an interest, a curiosity, a passion, even things I've done at different stages of my life, all back to something that I just came across. In a book I had to have open in front of me, a poem or a story. And I wonder what an awful student I must have been. And although I realize too, that they say all these things come back to get you. And they did with mine because years ago when my daughter was about 8 or 10 years old, we had the teacher meeting where you go and you have the teacher parent thing. And my wife went because I couldn't go. And the report on my daughter Corey was that she was very good in school. If we could get her to focus, she was terrific. But sometimes, Mrs. D, I look over there and I see her sitting there, and she's just completely in a world all her own. At which point my wife at that time said, "You haven't met her daddy, have you?" So I completely passed that on. And but sometimes something hits you. So I'm looking through that book, and this was not anything we were assigned that whole semester. So I'm always thrilled to have found it. Especially because it's a poem. Oh yeah, we love poetry, and we'll all say that we love poetry. But let's face it, we read a poem when it's assigned, usually. And so this was a poem that we did not read, but I have never forgotten it. It's called I Too, and it's by Langston Hughes. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody will dare say to me, eat in the kitchen. Then, besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I, too, am America. Now, you talk about something jumping off the page to a 10, 11-year-old kid who was at the moment in a white school, in a white community, in a white town. I was in the 8th grade before I had a African American kid my age in class. And so, as often happens in moments like that, I said, "That's cute, who is that you?" And so I began searching his poetry, and it's a wonderful story about his discovery too. He was working as a busboy in a restaurant in Washington, D.C. in 1925. He was about 18 years old. And a famous poet at the time named Vachel Lindsay came in to have dinner. And Vachel was known for promoting young poets and advocating American poetry. And so Langston wrote out some of his poems on the back of some receipts. And when he was bussing the table next to where they were eating, he took some of his poems and he dropped them into the shoulder bag of Lindsay that was draped over the back of his chair. And later that evening, Lindsay found them there, was so impressed, he read it that night at his poetry reading and said, "I do not know who this Langston Hughes is. I don't know how this poem ended up in my bag. But this is an important young new poet." And so word got out, and so Langston Hughes distributed, and so he became known briefly as the busboy poet. Before going on, then that got him a scholarship to the University of Pennsylvania, or a school in Pennsylvania. He went and got his degree in English, and a whole career got launched. And so I mention all of that because sometimes, things that you think about or experiences you have can be lodged in you in odd places. And it takes a certain kind of thing to happen to jolt it back out. I thought of that moment. I thought of the day I sat in the classroom and discovered that poem by Langston Hughes when I picked this up and read it when it came out. These Truths by Jill Lepore, which I've talked about already. I love her stuff. And I've read this book and I've listened to it. And I think Jill is one of the great, I'm calling her Jill. I don't know her. But I listened to this book twice unabridged, read by her. So I figured, you know what, after 60 hours of hearing her in my ears, I can call her by her first name. But I love this because it was the whole history of the country. Most historians these days would tell you the country's too big for this kind of treatment. You have to have a book on the colonial era, and a book on the Revolution, and a book on the Civil War, and a book on women's rights, a book on civil rights, and a book on World War I. You can't do it all in one volume. But I think she would argue that it's important to have a fairly contained treatment of the whole country so that you can see the flow of the nation. It's hard when you're looking at individual trees to see where the forest is coming from, where it's going, and all that kind of stuff. And so she decided she was going, even though it was unfashionable, she was going to tell the whole thing. And early in the book, she talks about starting from 1492, which is a little controversial. Some people would say, well, no, wait a minute, America starts in 1607 in Jamestown, or 1620 with the Pilgrims, or 1630 with the Massachusetts Bay Colony, or 1776 with the Declaration of Independence, or 1787 with the Constitution. But she says, no, you have to go back to 1492. You have to go back when the old world crashed, and I mean crashed, into the new world. Because that first encounter sets the tone for everything that came after. One historian I was listening to recently said that Columbus's arrival in 1492 was the most important event of the last 1,000 years because of what it did to the whole world as a result of that. So touching on that, Jill Lepore says this: the origins of the United States dates to 1492 were troubling reasons when she did it. The nation's founding truths were forged in a crucible of violence, the products of staggering cruelty, conquest, and slaughter, the assassination of worlds. The history of the United States can be said to begin in 1492 because the idea of equality came out of a resolute rejection of the idea of inequality. A dedication to liberty emerged out of bitter protest against slavery, and the right to self-government was fought for by sword and still more fiercely by the pen. Against conquest, slaughter, and slavery came the urgent and abiding question, by what right? That's the first time she uses that phrase. She'll say it 10 more times over the course of the next 200 pages, I know because I counted. But her first quote of it doesn't come from anyone from America. It comes from a sermon. You'll love this. A sermon delivered in December of 1511 on the fourth Sunday of Advent. The minister, a man named Antonio de Mestinos, a Dominican priest, delivered the sermon in a church in Hispaniola. This is after the Spanish government had stated, more or less, that everything we find belongs to us. And everyone we find there belongs to us. And we can do what we want with it. That was the official statement of the Spanish government and their claims in the New World. And so this is a sermon, and this is 1511. Okay, so we're only less than 20 years from the discovery. And already claims are being made to who owns all of it. So in light of this conquest, this Dominican priest stands up to his congregation. Disagreeing with the king's ministers, he said that the conquistadors were committing unspeakable crime. Tell me, by what right or justice do you hold these Indians in such cruel and horrible slavery? By what right do you wage such detestable wars on these people who live mildly and peacefully in their own land, where you have consumed infinite numbers of them in unheard of murders and desolations? And then he asked, are they not men too? 1511, asking that question. The entire slave trade hasn't even started yet. And there we are with a man at the beginning saying, by what right do we do what we're doing? You know, it reminds me too that there's always a voice that advocates by what right. You know, I'll tell you, a quirk that really irritates me is when someone will quote a writer or a historian, someone significant, some celebrity, and they'll say, well, you know, they did make some somewhat racist remarks, but you know, people from that time, that's what they did. Yes, they did indeed say something a bit, you know, but you know, that was part of the time they lived in and something like that. No, you do not. For every year that there was slavery going on, there was someone in this country who said it was wrong. For every time people were sent into something, if they were sent into detention camps because they had Japanese ancestors here in 1942, every time someone said, you know, you shouldn't drink out of that fountain, or you don't have the right to sit in that part of the bus, or it's okay to open up fire hoses on black children. Every time something like that happened, and somebody would say, well, you know, it was just the way they thought. You can't get away with that. It was not something in the air. Every racist act, every anti-Semitic statement, everything that says someone is like that is a choice that is made. To say that and to believe that. And it's tough. It's tough. It puts a lot on it. But that question just kept coming through this book over and over and over. Of by what right? I think about, you know, what we've been going through over the last couple of years, you know, because we're looking at that now. We're looking at years now of our circumstance with COVID-19, how it's jolted us in our work lives, in our personal lives, and all of that kind of thing. And we see all these things, people advocating, people upset about it, people say, you know, and we're hearing that too. By what right do you tell me I have to keep up? Well, that's spinning it around, isn't it? It reminds me of another sign I see many times driving through Sunderland. Someone put a sign out in front of the yard that says, unmask our children. Which is to me like looking in the wrong end of the telescope, isn't it? Shouldn't that say defeat COVID? No. You know, protect my children? You know, that's right. That's right. But that's not the sign you see. What you literacy, is other things. And you know, when I hear that, you know, and I had a good conversation months ago with someone who had not been vaccinated. And the primary reason was fear of science, fear of what they're being told that it does, you know, and which is in some ways deeply disturbing. And I was, when the vaccinations for in the 1950s, they're using for polio, that's right. There was no reaction to that. In fact, I'll tell you, here's one of your trivia bits for today. Do you know who Man of the Year was for Time Magazine in 1960? U.S. Scientist was the Man of the Year because of the vaccines that they had come up with. Now, if you talk about it, you know, people who are afraid of this kind of thing, and my favorite pet theory about this too, is the people who aren't taking it because they believe that Bill Gates has put microchips in the vaccine. So that you take several, for the record, Bill Gates for the vaccine. But you see how things can get twisted around. You know, I believe, you know, that something like this, they often say, you know, that it brings you together and it pulls you apart. And I think when I'm looking at, you know, how do we get past this? Well, the things that we can do to bring this together. And I thought this concept of life walk right, and the idea of asking the question of why do we do what we do? You know, I love our statement of fellowship that we do there at the beginning because it's a unifying thing. And that phrase, you are not alone. There's times when people are worried about what's going on out there. I wish I could just go out into the streets and just spoke with people and say to them, you're not alone. Your fear and your worry, you're not alone with it. And if, you know, it's an idea to try and bring us together. Because that question of who is America? Who is America? That's a constant definition. I want to quote Heather Cox Richardson, which you should quote daily as a general rule. But in her book on it's a book called How the South Won the Civil War. Arguing that a lot of the modern conservatism is based on the concept of America advocated by the Confederate States of America. And she says, you know, this divide has always been part of us. And it's right there at Thomas Jefferson. The greatest advocate of liberty and equality in our country was a slave owner who believed women were inferior and should be not given any responsibility, and who called the Native Americans savages. Now that's a split personality there. And the reason is that his definition of freedom and equality wasn't big enough. And that is what we always have to work at. You know, and so it seems like what we're going through now can be so alienating. We are sealed off in so many ways. I've stood up here before and talked about being sealed off in our cubicles, in our chat rooms, and stuff like that. But over the course of the last 2 years, we've been sealed off in a whole new set of ways. And it engenders fear. It engenders worry about what the future is going to hold because things are constantly having to be shifted around. I find myself, as all of us are, you know, with the news feeds and stuff like that, seeing so many battles being fought over and over and over. You know, there are so many things about our country that wow, we know that. I thought we were past that. I thought we were the levels of equality and women's rights, African American rights, and you know, and then yet here we are, battling so many things over and over and over. And partly it's because our notion of freedom and equality is incredibly challenging. It requires you to listen. I made a point of listening to this person tell me why she had not been vaccinated. And she was concerned about what the vaccination would do to her. You know, it was fear, you know, but a lot of it is part of our own quest to find our place in a world that's changing so much. You know, what kind of work conditions and living conditions are we going to have as we move forward? You know, it's not just a matter of getting a shot or not getting a shot, but also it's about how to have a livelihood phrase that pops up so frequently in our world, quality of life. But that's a difficult thing to grapple with, especially when it's changing every day. So when I think about coming together, when I think about my country that I love, I come back to a poem like this, which hit me as a kid and made me think, you know what? My definition of what the person's an American should be bigger than it is. It should include this person. And I would know that without a person who felt not included, who spoke out and reached a white kid in the 10th grade in a southern school. And made me wonder, what's the story there? What is the story that I don't know? And these questions, what's her story that I don't know? There's always been a debate about the purpose of American history. Some believe that it should, make you proud of your country. There should be a list of achievements, which there are. But then there are some people, like Howard Zinn and his people in the United States, who try to show the dark side of this. That there, for every achievement, there was also moments when there was not enough freedom, and not enough equality, and not enough education, and not enough about rights. And so reaching a balance of these two things, and I think this is what this book is so great at. I thought Little Four gave us the country with all of its bumps. One of my favorite quotes is from Hans Holbein, the great artist who painted the court of Henry VIII. And so when Henry VIII was looking for wife number 4, he sent Holbein to Germany to paint this woman, Anna Please. And so he painted her and brought back the painting. And Henry VIII said, oh, well, that doesn't look too bad. That's fine, bring her over. So she came over and they arranged to have marriage number 4. Well, it turns out she didn't look a lot like her picture. And Henry was very upset about this. And if you've seen Wolf Hall, or about the Wolf Hall story, man gets in trouble over this. But Holbein said, well, sir, it is a tradition when you are painting royalty that you don't paint the top mark. But I think it's important to see the top mark in our journey. It's important to see where you go. Some people just don't want to look at that. They don't want to look at race issues. They don't want to look at this footage of people being beaten up and dogs being sick on. They don't want to hear about internment camps in the middle of America in World War II. They don't want to hear about these kind of things. But the lesson of our history is that you have to do that. You have to look at something and see that that's not right. You have to live the not rightness. This guy, I did not know many black people, but when he said they send me to the kitchen when company comes, I thought of people that I knew were shut out. I thought of people that I knew couldn't go places. So we come to places in our journeys where we try to stop a moment. It's hard to do that. Everything in your life says, hurry. Everything in your life says, go faster, go faster, go faster. All these people who zoop around me, in the car. I'm not going fast enough. You hear that? There's a cultural push to that. You're not going fast enough. You're not reading enough information. You're not reading all your emails. But I think one of the things that this book made me do, and why I recommend it, is it did in some ways what that poem did. It stopped me for a moment and made me think again about what I know. We're so proud of what we know, aren't we? We're proud of what we know. We're the age of the internet. Everybody knows anything. I know anything up and get any answer in a couple of seconds. If you need to know a great movie, I can tell you a great movie about that. But all of that information can be just waves that wash over us. And eventually, as with all things, it washes over us. What happens when something washes over something long enough? It wears it down and smooths it out, takes away the edges, takes away the nooks and crannies, takes away stuff. And so I wanted to mention this book, to talk about this poem, just to remind us sometimes in our craziness, it's good to just stop for a minute. And, you know, even in our anger, we're frustrated, you know, we're frustrated and downright pissed off by a lot of things other people are doing and not doing. But, you know, building up the anger there makes it hard to listen. It makes it hard to pay attention and to slow down. And we're moving into winter, you know, we're moving into the kind of more languid world where things are going to be slowing down a little bit. And so I just wanted to take a moment and tell you of a moment where I think jolted me a little bit out of where I was and put me somewhere slightly different. You know, revelation coming from the sky, you know, I'm sure all that's great, but most of the changes in our life are little elbows. Little elbow, you know, oh, maybe that's not right. Oh, maybe that's not right the right way to think. That's how change happens. Change happens. Revolutions don't happen because of law. Revolutions happen, Joyce said, they begin in the heart of a peasant on a hillside who says, this is not how it should be. And that's our lesson. That we can change it just by one person choosing to do something different, take a moment, and to look. So, thank you for coming here and being part of it. I say this every weekend, and that's because every time standing up here, I get it again with how great it is to look at and see you. You come here to be a part of this, to share and to talk and to go away back out there, even if you go to the Scarecrows or the Tag Sale, or wherever you go from here, to take it with you and to take some time this week. Be careful, be safe. Amen.
Thank you. I don't know if this is an appropriate time to share, but a couple things that Sarah said makes me want to share these things with you. On October the 13th, this past week, 1954, I came to America 67 years ago. Serendipitously, did not include anything good. I came over on a ship called the Liberty. And I'm doing Odyssey of my father from 1940 to 1945, his work experiences. He was in camps for 5 years. He was a whole war experience camp. Anyway, in doing the research, I found that this ship, the Liberty, on which we came, and my father stood on the deck and saluted the Statue of Liberty and said, I knew I would be forever free. But found out that this ship had been, in World War II, a German warship with another name, German name. The ship had been captured by the Americans and given to France in reparation. And France took the ship, turned it into a liner, changed the name to the Liberty. And that's what we came to America. So that was so serendipitous.
Well, I'm glad you came over. Glad you're here. Yeah.
I neglected to announce that Dan Timon and his trio are performing at 2 under the tent. So, you know, so they
Down there, yeah.
down at the
Oh, yeah, okay.
down at the fair this afternoon at 2 o'clock, and you know they sing all the songs we know, so it's fun. Come listen.
That's great. All right. Our closing hymn. Just as long as I have breath. And number 6. All right, and our closing words for today: yes to life, yes to truth, yes to love.
Our people.
Here's of everything.
I'll just chat.
Oh,
Where's the chat?
And then you can talk to them, and I gotta undo this.
I think it's too confusing.
Hi. There you go.
They can hear me?
I don't know. Ask
Hi, Tony. Hi, Jenny. Hi, Leslie.
them. There we go. And then, so, I keep trying to put the Bluetooth speakers on.
I can't hear with all the noise.
No.
You guys are all well? Are you getting better, Tony?
Did you want to put those headphones on or no? Can you hear a little bit? Oh, Tony's on mute. Yeah. There we go. There we go.
Barry, that was an excellent talk. I like the point you made. It was